Hi, I'm Dr. Mel Lurie. I'm a physician specializing in psychiatry, and I'm the author of PsychePolitics, How to Read the Political Mind. We've already talked about how we've gone from the biology of our genes to the psychology of our minds. We've talked about some other subjects, such as the unconscious and how it works in politics. Now we're going to talk about reproduction, sex, and beyond. Let's talk about some of the steps that have to be taken. First, there has to be mating. Now, once again, in our modern society, some people reproduce without mating. Men do that and go away. Women might be artificially inseminated. But for the most part, people do mate. And by mate, I mean a relationship of commitment by the members of the opposite sex to have and raise a child. That's the traditional definition that I'm using here. Once again, not everyone does it. It's not absolutely necessary in a society, but that's the prevailing mode. Another critical element is nesting. There has to be a place to have the child. We see this in the animal world, and we do it too. In prehistoric times, there was a cave. Nowadays, we have apartments and houses. There's the nest. And then, of course, the sex act has to take place. I made this a small bubble because there's a lot of pleasure involved. It's easy. These other functions require a lot of work. Maintaining a relationship requires a lot of emotional work. Nesting requires a lot of work. Sex, well, most people don't even see it as work because there is so much pleasure in it. There's not all pleasure, but we won't get into that here. The next step is birth, and this is the biological moment of truth. It is at birth, which has to take place in order for us to survive and reproduce. At birth, the woman is relatively helpless. She has to depend on others. At certain times she can depend on women, but throughout history, to bring nourishment in, she would depend on a man. She'd also depend on a man for protection during this vulnerable time for her. That is, the man, in his role, goes out into the real world to acquire resources. In ancient times, food. In current times, other things. To bring to the woman. The men acquire. Now, I don't have to remind you that the woman feeds the baby from her body. Again, it's not always the case. In ancient times, there were nursemaids for those who could afford it. As things got more modern, there was the bottle. But biologically speaking, the woman's role is to feed the baby through her body. Is it not surprising that women are more focused on food than men? They're focused on nourishment, the best food, the healthiest food. That's part of what they have to do right. Now, this is an important point because in many other ways, what is biological is translated into our unconscious and conscious minds, into our thoughts and feelings, and our planning and deciding, and then ultimately our behavior. So it shouldn't be surprising that males, whose function was to go out and acquire nourishment for their genes, really, biologically speaking, that men would value independence. They'd value being strong or fast. They'd value autonomy, functioning alone. Let's go to another function, nurturing or raising the children. That's work. That's work for sure. And it's hard work. We humans, have few offspring. You know, it's easy for the plants. They have thousands of seeds. There's not much work that the mother or father plant can do. Of course, they can't do any, so they have thousands of seeds. Let's look at fish. Most fish have hundreds, if not thousands, of eggs. They don't have to do much work for each one. Some of those eggs will survive. That is, the fish that come from some of those eggs will survive. Not all of them, but some of them. But for humans and for other mammals, like elephants, for example, there are really few children. And therefore, it takes a lot of work to get them to the point where they can reproduce. If the work weren't done, then the children wouldn't do well, or they would die out. So there's pleasure in nurturing and raising children. That drives parents to do it. Oh, you say it's hard work. How can it be pleasure? Well, think of the pain you'd endure and parents would endure if they ignored their children. Young parents, when they first go out and leave their baby home, have a lot of anxiety about what will happen. It's important to the parent to be there. The parent suffers pain when not. Now, something else is important. I've talked a lot about human nature, and human nature is important to consider in politics. About the one thing that I would say in all of this more or less analysis is that the best government, the best political system, is the one that's most aligned with human nature. But that begs the question, because it's so hard to differentiate between human nature and human nurture. In fact, it's human nature to nurture. And as the nurturing process occurs, differences between each of us as children occur. We're pretty much the same when we're born at birth, but we start to be differentiated more and more as we are nurtured and as we go out into society. Now, something about this is striking to me from a biological standpoint, and a lot of the listeners might not find it relevant. And that's that different people can have these functions to different degrees. Some might not like to mate, but they want to adopt and nurture. Some don't want to have sex, or at least not reproductive sex, but they find other ways to engage these other parts of human nature. Some people will never mate, but they'll coach teams. That's nurturing. And the interesting part of this is, from a biological standpoint, that there must be different locations in the genes for each of these functions. That it's not just one gene controlling all of them. In fact, probably at each location, there are several genes, and some of them are more adaptive, so that there's more pleasure in actually mating, nesting, having sex, birth, and nurture. But other of those genes might be, well, not that strong in nurturing, but strong in the other functions. Well, that's enough of that. This is really an overview of the reproductive process that we all go through. Remember, reproduction is not just sex. There's a lot more to it. Also interesting is that at various times in history, there was an order to these things, more or less the order that I gave you. First you mate, you get married, then you get an apartment, then you give birth. Well, you've had sex the whole time, presumably. And then after birth, you nurture. Of course, in today's world, you can have sex, give birth, then get a nest, and then mate. That is, officially make that commitment. A lot of people in a lot of countries don't make that commitment in terms of what's called marriage, but they have a relationship that endures and functions in the same way. That's biological. It's political to have a system that defines marriage in one way or another, but biologically, there's pleasure in mating and in reproducing, and that's what keeps one's genes part of our species. In any case, after all this work and nurturing, we go into the real world, and we'll talk about that in a later slide. Well, I hope from this video you've gotten an idea that there is a little bit more to developing the next generation than just sex. In the next video, we'll really talk more about how this works. It's called Childhood Development, Morals, and Values.